Ahoy VC, still not on the personal oasis, but this is Isaac from the Blind Island, and we finally made it. We're here in the top 5 favorite albums of all time for me, as of right now anyway. And I really love all of you guys. Thank you so much for all of your support and for watching these videos. And I can't wait tomorrow to tell everyone who's won the contest and to just give those people their prizes, and especially in the midst of all of this craziness. It's gonna be great to bring some smiles to some people's faces. So, now, let's get on to my top 5 favorite albums. At number 5, I have Nick Drake's Pink Moon. I do have a copy of this. It's not an original pressing, which I would give my left arm to have an original pressing. I couldn't even imagine what I'd do if that happened to come through. I mean, I would just plot. But I digress. I have a reissue. However, I'm just staying at a place while we're in the midst of transitioning all of our stuff, and I grabbed what I thought all of my albums for these videos would be. However, I missed this one because I don't have a record player. I wasn't really thinking about it deeply, and but I do own this one. It's a nice US reissue, and I just encourage everyone to go and get one because the reissues have wonderful sound quality, pressed on high quality vinyl, and come from great tapes. And it sounds so good. So I would just, and it's a much cheaper alternative than going out and buying an original copy or even a 1976 reissue. So just go out and get the music because it's so worth having. This album, Dean over at Grandma's Handbag described it as voyeuristic. It's almost something that you feel guilty looking into, and I couldn't agree more. This is capturing a young man who is at his absolute tether's end. He is frayed, he is frail, and you can hear the trembling in his voice as he goes through all of these sparse and spare acoustic songs. The entire set is acoustic, guitar, his voice, and a little overdubbed piano on a couple of tracks. But really, it's just raw and naked, and there is nothing hiding any of his emotion from the tape. I think that an album that is similar to this could be Joni Mitchell's Blue. She is very raw and real on there, and I would have to think that she it was only released a year later after Pink Moon, and maybe she listened to that and expanded upon it. But this original, the Pink Moon, is one of those albums that you hear every single stroke of his fingers on the guitars. You hear the crackling in his voice as his mind begins to give way, and just a few short months later he would end up taking his own life. It's a hard listen, but it's also a beautiful listen. It is a document of what transcendent beauty can come out of such darkness, and that everyone eventually, at one point in time or another, is going to feel like this. Just this horrible emptiness and pain, and to know that there is someone who has been there is something that helps you. I have had my very dark nights of the soul, And this has been a record that I go to and know that I am not alone. And while his story ended in tragedy, eventually a pink moon will give way to the morning. And I just think that it's really important to just listen to these hard albums. Give them the time of day. And there is nothing wrong with listening to fun, happy-go-lucky music. But sometimes it's important to listen to the sad, hard stuff too. And that's why it's my number 5. At number 4, I have Bob Dylan, Blood on the Tracks. What I have here is the 2019 Record Store Day reissue of Blood on the Tracks test pressing. And this was the original way that these songs were recorded. And I love the original. I love them both equally, but I think that this ekes it out just a little bit more because it completely captures the feel, the mood, and the atmosphere of where Bob Dylan was when he created these songs. When his marriage was falling apart, his personal life was in tatters. He had not come out with an album in about, maybe 5 years that anyone had truly respected. He was already beginning to be seen as a vanguard of an old age in 5 years. And that's not to say that there wasn't great stuff that was released in that. In fact, earlier on my list, New Morning is one of my favorite albums of all time and is usually seen as a footnote in his discography. And maybe it is in comparison to a lot of his other more important works. But this was the album that signaled Bob Dylan had so much more left in the tank and left to say to people and say about relationships. Every single song on here is beautiful. Every single song on here is like a piece of art. I know that he was studying painting at the time, and he was making his songs like paintings, and sometimes the beginning of the story would wind up in the middle of the song, and sometimes the end would start at the beginning, and the middle would be at the end, and it was just all over the place, but all the details were there. You had to figure it out, and that reflected how relationships work. Sometimes we can feel at the very end of our relationship like it's the beginning again. And sometimes at the very beginning we can already be dreading the end. You're gonna miss me, like, you're gonna make me lonesome when you go. Shelter from the storm, buckets of rain, tangled up in blue. There is no shortage of incredible lyricism on here. It's like in Shelter from the Storm, she came up to me so gracefully and took my crown of thorns. Come in, she said, I'll give you shelter from the storm. It's like, with silver bracelets on her wrists and flowers in her hair. It's full of poetry. And it is so beautiful to hear how raw and naked, and I think that's one of the reasons why he took this test pressing off the market and redid a few of the songs, especially the song Idiot Wind, because it's all about rumors and all about things that are being said throughout towns, throughout people, throughout newspapers. And when it's like this was in the first stage, just grief, absolute grief over it. And then when he went to go and remake some of these songs, he was in anger mode. And Idiot Wind sounds much, much angrier than the version that's found on here. And I think he was just in a different place by the time he wanted to release it. But this captures his pain. And it's funny how a person's personal pain can transfer over. And also, not only that, produced some of the most loving lyrics and understanding lyrics of all time. Because when you truly love someone, even if it ends, you never let them go. They're always there with you. They're always a part of you. And there's that understanding that is found in this album throughout the entirety of it. And even when it seems like a relationship is at the darkest, lowest point, there's still beauty in it. And you don't need to get a divorce or you don't need to break up to have been there. And that is what makes this album so transcendent, so wonderful, and so amazing. And I can't get enough of it. At number 3, I have Tom Waits' Alice. I know a lot of people are going to be a little confused why Alice is so high up on my list. Tom Waits came out with so many great albums: Closing Time, Heart of Saturday Night, Mule Variations, and Blue Valentines, Swordfish Trombones. But to me, this record right here, Alice, is the dark, dark beating heart of Tom Waits. It is full of raw emotion, and the beauty that is found within this album is so incredible. His lyricism has never been so on point, and there's never been a person that I feel who can take something that is almost so bald-faced and juvenile and make it work like Tom Waits can on here. Like Flower's Grave. It's like literally talking about how no one will ever show love for a flower after it dies. It sounds like the dumbest idea for a song, but Tom Waits in this album makes it work, and it makes you almost want to cry for this flower. And I'm sure you're starting to see one, like a pattern for my top favorite albums. They're albums that make me emotional, and this album makes me emotional. And not only that, he talks about freaks in this record. It is a concept album about Wonderland and about the author of Alice in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll, and his almost unhealthy fixation on the young Alice Liddell, and how he is almost captured and trapped by his undying, wavering love to this ideal that may or may not even be real, but how love can still be beautiful even in the midst of this crazy, weird, dark place. And how he describes that when he's tracing her name, it's like skating on thin ice, and eventually he's gonna fall through and wind up drowning in his own just fixation, but he can't stop himself. And this album is just full of imagery that's like that. It is one of those records that I don't feel gets the just like screaming praise that it deserves. It deserves to be sung from the mountaintops. This is an incredible, incredible album. And then how some love just wasn't meant to be. Like the bird and the whale. How we want, if only I could be here with you forever, but we won't be here forever. And I just think that it is one of those records that just doesn't get the look like some of his other classics get. And while, again, I completely understand if someone doesn't like this album, it is very dense, it is very dark, it has some carnivalesque, and I mean, the instruments used on here are archaic and strange and sometimes not even pleasant to the ear. But it also is one of his most beautiful ballad albums. And if you just open your mind, give it a try, I think that'll worm into your heart as well. And at number 2, I have Charles Mingus, The Black Saint, and The Sinner Lady. This is the album that got me onto jazz. I will never forget when I first heard it. I went into the record store that I worked at for the past 2 years. I was new to Madison, and this was about 5 years ago. I wasn't a huge jazz fan. I mean, I had a couple of jazz albums, but they were more obligatory. You know, your Dave Brubecks and a couple Duke Ellingtons and Kind of Blue. But I went in there, and this was playing. It was on the CD, and I stopped in my tracks, and I listened. And people passed by me, people kept on looking, and so I tried to move myself into a corner, and I just kept listening. I didn't look at anything, I just kept listening to this music, because I had never heard anything like this. I hadn't had this much of a visceral reaction to music since I was about 8 years old and heard An American in Paris, or Rhapsody in Blue. And I realized what music could be. Because this is literally the entirety of the human experience captured into one record. The highs, the lows, the anger, the passion, the fury, the love, the grace, the betrayals. It's all there. It is a hard album. It is not one that is for the faint of heart. I wouldn't recommend this necessarily for beginners, but at the same time, I wasn't really into jazz, and this is what got me there. This is what cracked my icy heart to the jazz community, and I fell in love with the genre because of this album. And maybe it is because it sounds so different. It has so many different moods. It goes from just these wailing trombones and trumpets to Spanish guitar. And it's a journey. Every single time I listen to it, it's a journey. Something I can't get enough of. And I can listen to this still. Close my eyes, listen all the way through, and not want any distraction, any interruption, because it is so intoxicating. I highly recommend, if you haven't listened to it, I've seen this mentioned in the VC quite a few times, but this is an absolute must listen. And yeah, just one of my absolute, it's number 2 for a reason. In fact, number 1 and number 2 vacillate, and this one becomes number 1, and number 1 becomes number 2. But you just gotta listen to it. It's so good. All right, the moment you all have been waiting for. Well, probably not. But this is my number 1 pick. This is my number 1 favorite record of all time. And it is very divisive. Some people are going to be like, yeah, way to go. This is such a good pick. And some of you are going to be like, this is trash. Obviously, you're just being an avant-garde hipster who just wants to be cool. And I mean, you can have your opinions, whatever. That is totally fine. I totally understand why people don't get this record. But I have to share it. And it's number 1, Trout Mask Replica by Captain Beefheart and his Magic Band. This album has opened me up to so many other things that I never, ever thought that I would like. I mean, I didn't think that I was going to really like half the music that I do today if I hadn't listened to this, because it stretched me, it pushed me, it pulled me, it ripped me open and built me up again. And it's like it broke my bones in order to bind them and make them stronger, put titanium rods into them, and see music for the ultimate mosaic that it actually is. Because this is what this album is. It's a mosaic. It literally takes the history of American music and takes a hammer, bashes it, and puts it all together. And you hear bits and pieces of Dixieland jazz, blues, R&B, rock and roll, and free jazz, avant-garde, bebop, scat, and just psychedelia, pop, just spoken word poetry, and puts it all together and forces you to eat it and see it and know it and love it. And I do. I love this ugly album so much. It is the most rewarding album. I listen to it time and time again, and there is always something new, always something I take from it, always something that is just, I never heard that, I never knew that, I never heard this line in this context. Wow, that speaks to this. Oh man, I can't believe that he was inspired by that. The story behind the album, mixed with how regimented he kept his band, mixed with how he worked for an entire year to make sure it sounded exactly the way it came out, makes me respect it even more. If only I could be half as disciplined, half as hardworking, half as just completely given over to a vision as this crazed genius was, how far I would be in life. I mean, it is just one of those albums that, yeah, it's not going to be the one that you turn on at parties. It's not going to be the one that you put on in the car with friends. But it's going to be the one that you sit with. The one that you're going to sit with and argue with. Like your wife, like your lover, like, you know, you're told by lots of people that you should get to know this person. Because, yeah, they have a thick outer shell, but once you get to the center of it, you're going to understand. And that was kind of me with this album. The first time I heard it, I was like, this is trash. Why does anyone even recommend it? Why does anyone, what value is here? But it's like one that I just kept on going back to, and like it was magnetism. Like there was just something in it that said, I can't just write this off. I can't just say this is just the ravings of a lunatic. If it was, I could have easily put it away. But I kept coming back. I kept coming back. And each time there was more and more to love and more to enjoy. And there is every sound that I love is found in this record. And I could sing its praises forever and ever. I have turned on some people to this album who never thought they would like it. And I have also turned some people away from it. But I think that's what it is. It's not an album that is one that people can just be like, they have very strong opinions about it. And I think that's another reason why I love it. Because it's not one of those records where you're just like, oh yeah, that's there. Like, you know, like Radiohead, OK Computer. Yeah, that's a good album. I like that album. Even people who don't like Radiohead still kind of like OK Computer. Like, yeah, that's good. But either you are like, I worship at the cult of Captain Beefheart, or burn every copy. And that means he was onto something. because he was doing something that no one had ever heard before, and really, in a lot of ways, no one has ever heard since. I love it. I breathe it. I preach it. Captain Beefheart, Trout Mask Replica. And we are done. 100 albums out of the way. And tomorrow, I bring to you the winner of the Personal Oasis contest. When I started this off, I just wanted to get to 100 subscribers. I am now up to 150 and growing. And again, I've realized that doing this isn't about gaining subscribers. It's about sharing music, getting to know people, and getting to know people who I even thought were heroes of mine and I would never even get to talk to. And it's really great just getting to know all of you. This is what the VC is all about. And I am just so happy to be here. Thank you so much for just even listening to these ramblings. I know that these last 2 videos were outside of my normal, more condensed 10-minute, 15-minute range, but I had to talk about these records a little bit longer because they mean so much to me. And just thank you guys. The VC is the best community in YouTube, no bar none, and I can't wait to announce the winner tomorrow. I hope that you all have a great day on your own personal oasis. Be safe and be blessed. Cheers.